Hey, everybody, I'm Joey.
And I'm Rachel, and this is Good Things to Watch with Joey and Rachel, a podcast with two pals who watch a lot of movies and TV. We'll be taking a deep dive into our favorite films and shows and sharing insights as to what you should be watching too.
Today, we'll be discussing the new greatest movie you're not watching, The Vast of Night.
Just a warning, this episode will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Vast of Night, what are you waiting for? Go watch it and then come back.
How are you today, Rachel?
Good. Just kind of trying to take an easy day today. How about you?
Same, it's these quiet times that we have throughout this year. I love spring, trying to just get outside while it's warm. We were just chatting a second ago about how I was asking you, what are you excited for movies and shows coming out? And we're feeling like we don't have too much coming out that we're excited for, I suppose.
No, there's not a lot in the way of movies coming out. I mean, there's some good TV coming back now that production schedules are kind of in flux, not as quickly as they were before. So kind of episodes of some shows that I watch are coming 1 to 2 a month or coming for 3 weeks in a row and then disappearing for a month. But that's okay. They're coming along, and at this kind of pace, I don't feel frantic to watch everything either. So it's kind of been enjoyable.
If you haven't I don't know how into Marvel you are, and I know I feel like I have the same question with you every time before I start talking about Marvel movies, but WandaVision was awesome, was really, really cool. Not even just for the Marvel universe, but just for like anyone who's kind of a fan of American sitcoms, period. It's so neat. So many great like callbacks to other shows throughout the decades. Really, really cool. So that just finished up, and I just watched I fell asleep to it last night, so I have to rewatch it today at some point. But the behind the scenes of how they filmed it, and it's the show is called Assembled, like Avengers Assembled. For anyone who's listening, I'm using finger quotes right now for Rachel, who's looking at me on Zoom. But so it's kind of just how they assembled the show, and it's really, really interesting, and I just loved it. And I just started it really late, and I don't know, I guess I just couldn't keep up. But I'm excited for Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is like their second show in the lineup of Disney Plus stuff that they're pushing out. So they really hit it out of the park with that. But definitely, I think you're right. It's a lot of shows coming out, not too many big movies that I'm excited for.
I've really, I'm not a huge Marvel fan only because I never really started with a lot of the movies. So I feel behind. I haven't caught up on any of them. But I have been more into the DC Arrowverse on the CW. That's where I get a lot of my superhero content. So, Arrow, Supergirl, all those. I have started Superman and Lois now, which is excellent. 3 episodes in, and I'm all in on it. I think it's wonderful.
Well, Tyler Hoechling's been on TV for quite some time, so I feel like it's almost kind of a guarantee that he'll bring in enough pull for it to be successful, and he has kind of enough gravitas in TV world that I think he's interesting. And I never really watched the CW superhero shows. I kind of am a stickler for superhero stuff. I think it has to be like top quality. And I feel like those shows, while they come very close, I think they just briefly missed the mark. But I will say this, that Flash is charming as hell. Whoever that guy is, Grant Gustin, I think his name is.
Grant Gustin, yes, he is very charming, and he's very, very good as Barry Allen.
Not to say anything bad against Ezra Miller, but I think that kid, I wish he was in the movies, because I think my buddy went to college with him at the same time too. And
really,
I'm pretty sure, because I think I remember him saying something about being at a school with somebody who went to Glee afterwards. And I'm pretty sure it was
yes, Grant Gustin was on Glee, and he's a phenomenal singer. He's absolutely excellent.
I'm excited to see where he goes with his career.
Yeah, but we're 7 seasons into The Flash now. Some seasons are better than others, but that's kind of standard with any show, really. As far as Superman and Lois, I'm sorry, what was his name? Tyler
Tyler Holchin.
Yes, um sorry, I'm not really familiar with him beyond the Superman role, but he did actually start the Superman role in the Arrowverse crossovers for the last couple of years. Once a year, CW puts together the Arrowverse characters in a multi-story, like 5-episode arc highlighting each show. The last one was really phenomenal,
Yeah.
but he was Superman in the Arrowverse shows.
Yeah. He's he was really popular in Teen Wolf. He's just a character on that and was on that for a few years. I think before that he's known for Seventh Heaven. He's like one of the not he's not one of the children from the show, but he's one of the kids who just happens to for some reason move in with that family and stay there for a bunch of seasons. I swear there's like 8 or 9 kids that don't belong to the parents that they just take care of. Good for them. They've got hearts of gold, but I believe he started on that show, so he's got a little following. But
Okay, cool.
did you see the news on Avatar, the James Cameron's Avatar?
No.
It was re-released, I believe, in China, and because of that reopening, I'm not sure if it was an anniversary or something. It took back the top earning box office spot from Avengers Endgame. I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So Marvel's congratulating them on the win, but am I a little bit? Maybe I'm just a little bit too gung ho for Marvel, and maybe I'm a little bit too gung ho against Avatar, that Avatar, because I don't know. I feel like they cheated. I feel like okay, so you re-released it and I don't know, like who's watching it again in theaters? Who's paying to go?
I don't know. I mean, there might be the people so desperate to hit a theater right now because they miss it so much that maybe they will go see it.
I suppose, and I don't know. I feel like I am such a Debbie Downer when it comes to the Avatar craze, just because I think one, I don't think it was that impressive visually. I thought, yeah, beautiful, but nothing. I thought Life of Pi was better. And I guess the story's like Fern Gully or Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves. And yeah, there are stories that get retold over and over again, but that one just was that to a T. They even had a big tree like in Fern Gully.
I still have not seen it. I keep saying I'm going to, and then I just watch all these other things, and then I never get to it.
Yeah, it's got some interesting parts. I also am not a big fan of Sam Worthington. I think for me he's a little like kind of dry toast, kind of like that. That's the sensation I get from watching him in movies. Toast without butter or jam. Fine piece of bread. Fine actor.
Fine piece of bread, just a little stale and unpalatable.
It's not because I know he can act circles around me, and I don't want to insult the actor for his work. It's not for me.
Right.
You know?
I've got certain actors that I feel that about as well. And we're not looking to be mean here, but we're just being honest. We might not be into their work.
Sigourney Weaver plays a role in that though, and it kind of has like an Aliens feel because it's James Cameron and Sigourney Weaver kind of in a tougher role. They were actually going to use Michael Biehn, the guy who played Corporal Hicks from Aliens, my favorite action movie of all time, and it's also a sequel. But they didn't want the audience to be pushing back to that too much for.
Right. You also have him as Kyle Reese in Terminator.
Yeah, and he was fantastic. So, and he actually just made his debut back in, I don't know if we even spoke about this in our Mandalorian episode, but he came back in The Mandalorian. Did you recognize him?
I think we did because I'm just trying to remember back. I think my husband had pointed him out.
He looks different. I didn't recognize him at first, and I'm usually like eagle eye on that stuff, but he was like in the standoff when Ahsoka Tano was facing off against that leader of that village raid thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my husband had recognized him. I was trying to remember back, but I can't remember.
Yeah, hopefully he comes back into the limelight. But I don't know. Avatar's okay. I don't like that. I never liked that it had the top spot. And I forget who it defeated. Oh, Titanic. But I thought Titanic was a little more deserving.
Okay.
Interesting that it's the same director though.
I've never been a fan of Titanic.
I like the idea of it being the box office winner because it's such a blockbuster movie. It's so popular. It's so for everybody. It's not a artsy film by any means. So I think there's no like it's got to be one of those types of movies. There's never going to be anything that's a top box office winner that's not like the greatest like not fluff. I don't want to say fluff because like there's still a lot of fun, but they have to be really popular to a very generalized audience. Everyone's got to enjoy it for it to be a moneymaker like that.
Yeah, that is very true.
Do you think that the movie we're talking about today would be more popular if they had released it in theaters if they versus Amazon Prime?
I don't know because they did put it out in drive-in theaters 2 weeks beforehand, but then again, we're talking, about drive-in theaters during this time, so they weren't as populated.
That is a shame because that is a perfect movie. The Vast of Night is a perfect movie for a drive-in theater. It
It
is
is.
like
My
if they ever re-release it in a drive-in, we should go see it.
my dream is that this summer they would release it. I do want to talk about one more thing I'm going to watch before we dive into Vast of Night.
Absolutely.
I will be watching, I think I'm going to watch it today or tomorrow. I haven't decided which yet. It's called Kid 90.
Kid 90.
And it's a documentary put together by Soleil Moon Frye, otherwise known as Punky Brewster to many people, to everybody who knows who Punky Brewster is. She apparently documented most of her childhood between messages, phone messages that she kept, the video camera and tape recorder she brought with her everywhere and recorded all sorts of things between herself and other childhood actors, shenanigans they got into. So I guess it's a real good look at her life as a child in this acting scene. So I'm really, really interested to take a look at that.
That is interesting. I know I just talked to you the other day about there's like a remake or a reboot of it. Is that a continuation series? Is that still her?
Yes. Yep. If from what I understand, I have not watched it yet because I do not have Peacock, but she's grown up now. She's separated or divorced. I don't remember which. She's got a few kids of her own, and she ends up finding a girl and takes in a girl that reminds her very much of herself. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of where it starts.
Interesting. I wonder if that's kind of like having that project going on. Is that what prompted her to kind of look back and create, assemble this whole thing going on?
It was. She said, she started looking at, boxes that she had stored away. And as she was looking through it, she found her old diaries and journals and tapes. And she has like tons of tapes that she recorded. So yeah, it really, as she kind of like went through this process, she kind of looked back and she found some things in her life that she had not recalled that were traumatizing. And that's all part of this, is just like kind of rediscovering herself.
Oh, like it's always a risk diving back into your past, and
it is, especially now that the show is mirroring her life. I mean, she's just announced not long ago that she is separating from her husband of many years, the father of her children, and she kind of like finding who she is now apart from being a mother and being a wife, who she is as Soleil.
That sounds pretty interesting.
Yep. So I'm gonna take a look at that today or tomorrow, and that should be good.
It's what's interesting too is kind of like she had like a pretty good career, or not necessarily career, but life. Like she wasn't kind of like one of those child stars who fell through a bunch of trauma afterwards, correct?
She did in some ways, and I guess that's what this documentary gets into, is the things that did happen to her. She did kind of fall to the wayside a little bit, but she, fortunately for her, didn't do it as publicly
Mhm.
as a lot of these kids did, and she did make it through it at a more decent time than these other kids did. You know, in
Yeah.
a shorter, I shouldn't say decent time, a shorter amount of time. It looks like she kind of, maybe even in an unhealthy way, kind of shelved it all and just kind of moved on with her life. And that ended up working for her, but maybe not so much now that she's dredged up everything from her past. But she's working through it all. And this is just going to highlight who she was at the time.
I know, I mean, it's a long-standing reboot, but I always kind of like when actors kind of headliners show and kind of they use a lot of their own experience behind it to kind of influence it. And it's kind of because it's interesting. And I feel like some people might say it's like, oh, like better to keep it separate, but it's also what that actor knows. So it's kind of like they can lead you through those emotions better. So I think that's kind of cool. And it sounds like she's kind of one of the better off childhood actors who grew up and kind of got over that hurdle. So I'm glad to hear that. That's kind of it's inspiring to hear in Hollywood.
It is. It is. So shall we move on to the
Oh,
great topic of the day?
shall we move on to yes, we shall. I guess the first thing I just want to say is I love this movie, and it was referred to us by friend at work, and I just like as soon as I heard the title, The Vast of Night, I was like, that's kind of interesting. What's that about? And it sounds very sci-fi-y, and I'm kind of I don't know about you Rachel, but I'm kind of a little bit of a sci-fi geek. So I checked out the trailer, and it came out in 2019, which I am very surprised to hear. And maybe I just haven't used my Amazon Prime account enough. But total sleeper, awesome hit. I loved it. It's got this Twilight Zone, Orson Welles, like 50s kind of feel to it. I mean, it takes place in the 50s, but I think one of the best alien or extraterrestrial movies I've seen in quite some time. I don't even know what to jump off of. Like what I find was the best last thing we had.
Yeah. It was just so funny when you texted me and you told me about this movie, and I was like, okay, I just have to watch this right away. And I did love it right away. What's funny is my cousin claims to have told me about this months before, and I don't remember it. So, cousin, thank you. Um, but normally, I think this is a movie that I normally would have found myself at some point, except that I have all these different streaming apps: Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and I don't have time to build queues and watch lists. So I haven't combed through
Do
any of the catalogs.
people do that? Do people just compile watch lists on Netflix and things? I never used these.
Netflix, I have a long queue, a long, I don't know what they call it on there, queue, watch list, whatever they call it. I have a long one, and then I never get to these movies, or I hardly ever get to them.
I'm gonna start.
Um,
I'm gonna start adding to my queue.
Hulu, I have a few things, but there are only a couple of things that I watch on Hulu, so I don't spend as much time on there. So I haven't built a watch list. I think they just call it a list on there. And then on Prime, it's a watch list. And I haven't had the time to go through and just, except for found footage movies. Anytime I've kind of like found a found footage movie, I put it on my watch list, but I haven't spent any time looking at the other content that Amazon Prime has. So unfortunately, this kind of
I feel
fell
like
off the wayside for me.
I feel like Prime needs to work on their app overall because like Netflix, I think Netflix does it the very best out of all of them. And I even think Disney Plus has some work to do. But in the way that it features its new stuff or things that you haven't seen, and the way the trailer kind of overtakes most of the screen when you're scrolling, it's super cinematic and you're like, oh, that looks interesting. What's the scene? I want to check this out. Um, I was actually just saying the other day, it'd be kind of cool if Netflix started cutting more trailers together themselves for older movies that come on there, because I feel like trailers are super important and they're so tasteful towards what time they came out. Even a trailer that came out in 2002 will not be good today, but it'll be a hell of a lot better than something that came out in the 80s. But I'm just thinking they could recut it. And I think that's the problem with Amazon Prime and why maybe this movie is kind of buried is their app is not very user friendly to discover new stuff like that.
It's really not. I mean, sometimes I grab stuff from the because you watched or whatever they call it. And I did find something interesting that I'm just going to mention briefly. I did mention it to you previously, but it's called Resident Evil Childhood. And I can't really tell you too much about it because it's something you really have to experience. But it's a homemade fan film that two kids, now grown adults, made when they were children in 1997 that was based on the Resident Evil game series. And I think in 97, only one in Resident Evil 1 and 2 were out. But it's about an hour long, and it's these two kids who have turned their house into, a whole Resident Evil world. And it's truly delightful for Resident Evil fans. I would not recommend it to somebody who's not a Resident Evil fan because they won't get the inside jokes and the puzzles that the kids are solving around the house. But for somebody that's a hardcore Resident Evil fan, it is a fun look back to that game and discovering that game for the first time and having to find medallions around the house that'll fit in this doorknob that'll open the door and lead to a key that you find in the closet that, it's truly delightful. But I did find that just by scrolling through after I watched Vast of Night. So
That's funny. Maybe I should be checking that out more often then. And I guess I think Amazon Prime's the one to use the very least, but this was an absolute gem on it. And I don't know, I just love it. And it's kind of funny you mentioned like the two like more amateur filmmakers making that. It sounds really cool. And this one is kind of interesting for that reason too, is that this movie, and I think that's what like a lot of the reviews are saying, it's what sensational debut, inventive debut, and it's like all this really interesting stuff because these actors, directors, I think what is the director's name?
Andrew Patterson.
Andrew Patterson. So this is his first movie. I couldn't find much about him else than this. So I thought that was really interesting. These two actors, I haven't seen them in too much. I don't think there's any real big name in the whole entire movie. It got turned down from a lot of film festivals, which I thought was interesting. I think it got turned down from Sundance, or at least maybe the first shot at it or something like that. But something I thought was super interesting is like when I was watching some behind the scenes stuff on this, there was a voiceover of the executive producer. And the executive producer is like, "Hi, I'm so and so," and I feel bad because I didn't catch his name. I think, but he says, "I'm the executive producer, and I'm also the camera and gimbal operator for this scene." And it's like, what? It's just like something you never hear about unless it's like a smaller production like that. And I kind of love that because it sounds like it was a real passion project for all these people. And I love seeing super cool. I love like how filmmakers really can use what's not there to tell the story. And that's I think great storytelling and great filmmaking is when with Jaws. And this movie reminds me a lot of Steven Spielberg movies, specifically I think more so Close Encounters. But Jaws, the whole scary thing about Jaws, you didn't see the shark for most of the movie.
Right. And that's what made it effective. I mean, had Bruce the Shark worked, we'd have a completely different Jaws film that might not be as effective.
The whole opening scene would have been completely different. And I think it's known as one of the scariest movie scenes of all time. So I love that. So I think the whole movie reminds me of very early Spielberg. Mm-hmm. It really has, I don't know. It's just like, it's super artful. I think it's like Spielberg, but it's definitely more thoughtful in what they're showing you.
The Spielberg work that it reminded me the most of is Amazing Stories, which was a show that was only around for, I think, 2 seasons in the mid 80s. 85 to 87, I believe. And I was so hooked on that show. It was an anthology series. And each episode, it wasn't just horror or sci-fi. It could also have a fantasy or a mystical element. It was just kind of like this amazing, truly unbelievable story.
Mhm.
And it could be just a fantasy drama or something, it was a great show. And it just kind of like the setup reminded me of it so much. Even that long take
Mhm.
through the town was very kind of amazing stories like.
Yeah. Did you notice the opening of the movie? So they open on a black screen and there's some noises going on, but you see these little lights poking up from the bottom and the side, and it reminded me of what is that, like some sort of radio wave thing, or it's something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably meant, I mean, just from my take, it's kind of meant to be like radio waves that kind of almost look like a UFO.
Yeah. So for anyone who, like, I guess we can just give a little brief overview of the whole thing. So for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen it yet and is listening to this spoiler-filled podcast for some reason, essentially what happens is this movie is about a small town in New Mexico, and it's highlighting. I believe one's a high schooler, and I believe one maybe had just graduated within the past 4 years or so. So this young girl named Faye, who is a phone booth, not phone operator, and she's friends with this man Everett, who's a radio DJ, and it's all small town. Most of this town is collecting together for this basketball game, and the majority of town is there for it, and that's kind of like, so it gives you this feel of how small this place really is. So you get her in her little phone operator booth, him in this radio DJ building not too far away, and that's kind of the whole town, and it's really interesting, and the sound just comes through some of the phone calls that this girl is getting, and Faye then plays it onto the radio for Everett. So it's kind of like the whole town gets in on it. They get some mysterious phone calls about what it could be, and about UFO technology and aliens visiting from another planet and things. And it's super eerie, super interesting. But I think something I love about it so much is, and I think this kind of beckons back to Spielberg, is like the technology in the movie. I feel like they pay very close attention to the phone operator system, the radio DJ, the clickety click sounds, and it was interesting because it's just like, what do you think of that, Rachel?
I really think that it's amazing the way that they used sound, the way they used the score. It can be said about a lot of movies that the sound is amazing. They truly give awards out for that stuff. But when you have something that works as effectively as this, it's amazing.
It was really, really cool, and it just kind of, I think it really brought you back. And I think something that was cool about this movie, and I think, and you just said it about the longer takes. There's some really, really long takes in this movie, and it's not even just camera movement. There's some really amazing scenes right in the beginning of the movie, and you feel like it's tense. The whole, like, you're following this very fast-paced, long take camera movement that cuts through the entire town. You go from place to place to place, and it's on. When I read the behind the scenes, they actually did it on a go-kart, a little go-kart, and I think they had a kid operating the camera on this go-kart to get the effect. So it's kind of inspiring to hear. It's kind of like, oh, so it's kind of cool how they made it. But the scene is so long, and they hand off this camera from operator to operator to get scene to scene, and it's interesting because while the film had a very, very low budget, it's these long, long takes, and the actors in these longer takes that actually had people in it performing their stuff for, I think, 9 minutes long at some point, really just heightened the quality of the whole thing.
I kind of marked a few of them, just kind of going through. I went through yesterday. I watched the movie for a second time. I just really needed to. I really wanted to. The first one that you have is them walking and talking.
Oh, that's a
And
good scene.
even though it's just like a minute and 10 seconds, a minute and 10 seconds is very long in film when you're just talking. I mean, just sit there and wait for a minute and see how long it actually feels to you. So when you have dialogue that's uninterrupted and camera movements that are uninterrupted, a minute is amazing. And then you get to Faye in the switchboard, which is the 9 minutes that you were talking about, a little over 9 minutes. And then you have Everett when he's setting up the reels of the tape.
Yeah.
That's like 5 minutes. So it's all this action and dialogue going on at the same time without a cut.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And it's kind of like, that's why movies like Birdman are so revered, because I mean, I don't know if you've seen that movie. Fantastic movie, big comeback for Michael Keaton, and that's kind of what brought him into this whole like renaissance of Michael Keaton. But that whole movie is filmed as if it's taken place in one take, and it's really interesting how they do it. But it's just it's such a hard thing, and I feel like it deserves so much respect, because it's not just the actors who have to memorize 10 minutes of dialogue, crazy, out of control skills that they have to do that. But it's all of, and especially with all the camera movements, the whole crew is moving with them. It's not like you're watching a play. Doing a minute and a half to 10-minute monologue on a stage is hard enough as it is, but the crew is moving with them, having to make sure they get the shot, the audio, everything. And I just super impressed by that. And I love when you mentioned the tapes, the whole, everything with the radio station, the phone operator, and the sounds, and the sound that the UFO in the town produces, that she starts to hear on these calls, and hear some panic calls about some thing flying over, causing hurricane winds. They really beckon to Steven Spielberg and Orson Welles. There's even some scenes that black out. Like there's, you know, okay, so you remember the call, Rachel? The man calls in the beginning.
Billy.
Billy, yes. Billy calls to the radio station, and there's scenes where it just completely blacks out and cuts out, and
right.
You're still listening to it.
There's a shift. There's a shift as it becomes like a radio drama.
It does, and it's super Orson Welles-y. It reminds me of War of the Worlds, and because he's putting out the sound, he's asking people who's heard it, and this guy calls in, and Billy says, you know, I heard the sound. We had a big operation in which we buried this huge machine, bigger than any airplane I've ever seen. And he was telling us how he heard that sound coming from a machine that came higher than any machine could ever fly at the time. So I love how it's almost like literally leaving you in the dark. So you're hearing Billy talk about his story, about how there was some government cover up over UFO years ago. And you're listening to it, and it's kind of interesting because it cuts out, the screen cuts out, and you just listen to the audio. So it's kind of like you're listening to the audio of the radio too, and you're kind of just like, it sounds real, and it sounds like he's telling the truth. And by the way, I also love that story about, they say they use a lot of people of color to do the maintenance and this. So I imagine that have to take place in the 30s or 40s, because this movie takes place in the 50s. The story is saying it's about 20 years ago, I think. So it's interesting because they're saying, like, you know, historically they use people that, air quotes again, nobody would listen to. And I think that's just brilliant, because it ties into our history and our American culture in a way, and ties in this horror segment to it, and why we may not have heard of it before.
So I've kind of, you know, playing little sleuth, I've kind of figured that this movie takes place in, has to be like 58 or 59. And the reason I say that is because Everett mentions Sputnik, and Sputnik was in late 57.
Oh, you're right.
So this is 58, 59. And of course, okay, so that would be 58 would be 11 years after Roswell happened. And Roswell, you know, New Mexico. So, you know, there's already been this buzz about extraterrestrial life. I mean, of course, it's not like it is today where, you know, alien all over the place. Back then, it was still very hush hush, very secretive, only murmurings, you know, and conspiracy. But sure, I mean, the army would have done that, collected all these people from different places, people of color that unfortunately at that time would not have been believed if they said anything, you know. Uh, So it's an interesting story.
Mhm. I I love something I love about this movie, and I think it just calls back to the lack of budget, which kind of made them not be able to show too much throughout the movie. Um, but I think aliens and UFO stuff in real life, I'm scared of that stuff. I think it's super interesting. I've watched a whole bunch of like fun documentaries and scared myself to sleep kind of stuff. um, I watched a lot of stuff on like real life Men in Black, and I think that's super scary and just something I'd never want to mess with. And if anyone's listening to this, I'm just like, I support whatever you do, and I don't want to know. But I love how this movie makes it feel so real, and I think that's something that's missing from some movies. Is they really kind of just take you out into space, mind the pun, um, but I think this one really made it feel grounded and let you kind of feel like this could happen.
Now think about what you said there a few minutes ago when you said it had a very War of the Worlds feel.
Yes.
Do you recall the letters of the radio station?
The letters of the radio station. Yeah, it was wow, wasn't it?
What WOTW?
WOTW. Oh, that's so funny.
War of the Worlds.
That's interesting. That was a clever catch. I didn't catch that
I
one.
can't take credit for that. I
Okay.
honestly, I wish I could.
I was impressed.
I've tried not to watch too much on the internet. You know, not too many interviews, not too many behind the scenes, because I kind of like wanted this feel of our discussion to just be, you know, raw and us. I did watch a Q&A panel from a film festival,
Mhm.
in which an audience member asked about that. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't I see that? I'm usually catching all these things myself, and I did not catch that. I'm like, I kept wondering what WOTW meant, because I knew it had to mean something. You don't put call letters in a movie without it meaning something to you.
You should have told me.
Um,
I would have believed you caught that, and I would have still been just as impressed.
but you know me though, I'm too honest. I
Oh
would
my
do that.
god. I
I give credit where credit is due, but
oh
I just thought that was really cool.
um yeah, that was really cool. What do you think of the actors? Like I said earlier, there's no one really big in this. Like, who out of this do you think wins our Kathy Bates Award for that standout actor?
You know, I really, I love the both of them.
Yeah,
I liked them both right away, right from the start. You know, I love their mentor mentee friendship relationship.
I love those.
I love the fact that it wasn't assumed from right away that these two were going to be a love interest for each other. It
Yeah,
was, their relationship was defined right from the start. And the way he was with her, he's very, you know, of course he's a little pompous.
yeah,
You know, this character's a little pompous, but you can see that he has this friend affection for her that is so really endearing, and it's cute. And the way she looks up to him without looking up to him in a you know, you're a man way. It's
yes.
clearly a, you know, I value your opinion as somebody in the radio field. So
Super cool for that time, for a movie that's taking place in that time frame to kind of do that, because I think they really do kind of, they feel like it feels like the 50s with the conversations these people are having. Not that I've been to the 50s, but I imagine this is what the 50s were like. And I think it's really interesting how they made it so kind of a more respectful relationship between the two. You know what I kind of caught at that was, it reminded me of like a movie or a story in which um the woman in the story is not yet at her professional level that she wants to be, but she's aspiring to be this the great in her field, whatever that may be. And those two might have been a pair much later on in life after they've grown. The age difference wasn't so weird, And I don't think it even was that much of an age difference. I do think he had just graduated high school in the past year or so, just because of that pompous attitude. It seems like somebody's like, "Oh, you're still a little high schooler, aren't you?" Well, I'm a big radio DJ now. I did love how they spoke. I thought Everett, the actor who plays Everett, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't look it up, or I did look it up and don't remember off the top of my
Jake
head.
Horowitz.
Um, he is just I love that dude. I think he's so cool. The way he just, like, that accent was perfect when he's talking about, it's like, oh, you like science, don't you? Just tell me about science. It's just like, it just felt like Happy Days and just like took me to that time frame. And I just thought, and her with her fascination of what's happening with the UFO, what's this noise that's going on, what's people seeing this light in the sky. I think part of what I love so much about the movie is it wasn't just fear, it was fascination.
Yes, and from the beginning, she's kind of like a little more meek and mild. She's uncertain about herself, any capabilities, whatever. And as the movie progresses, you see her kind of take the lead and take charge in the situation.
I love how she runs all over town and keeps forgetting that he has a car.
That's great. I mean, she's used to walking everywhere, running everywhere. So it's just natural to her. Oh, there's an emergency. Let's run to it. I forget the fact that my friend has a car right here.
I love that, because for me that was kind of like, oh, that was what that was the availability of cars back then. Is some people just didn't have them, or kids never really thought that was something that they were going to have. And it also kind of tells you how small the places that they're in and how empty it is. And I just want to go back to those camera movements that go through the town, swooping through the whole town. You're just waiting for something to pop out and nothing pops out. Or maybe there is, I don't know, maybe something in the distance that you don't see. And I have to do a couple more rewatches of it. But I love the vastness of it. And I think that title is just perfect. And I love the Twilight Zone aspect of it. I'm not sure we talked about the Twilight Zone aspect of it, but
Twilight Zone has been a huge part of my life for many years. Since the time I was old enough to actually appreciate it, up through the last, I'd say, 20 years, I've been really into it even more. There were some, the Sci-Fi Channel runs marathons every year, every New Year's time. So there have been times where, either by myself because my husband was working second shift, on New Year's Eve, or when we've had a friend stay over, our friend Joe would come over and stay for 2 nights, for New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And we would watch the Twilight Zone marathon as we're talking, would be in the background as we're playing games or eating, whatever. So Twilight Zone has been a huge part of my life for a long time. And to see this movie open up with, a Twilight Zone-esque paradox theater, and they even had somebody that sounded like Rod Serling, and they had the opening narration, which was very Twilight Zone, or the other show that Rod Serling did called Night Gallery, which is very similar to the Twilight Zone. I loved that right away. It was an interesting way to tell the story as if you are part of this episode. This is an anthology series you are watching on TV. Brilliant storytelling.
One of my favorite Halloween movies ever. I'm pretty sure we talked about it during our one of our previous podcasts, was Trick or Treat. Mm-hmm. And also opens up with this small screen aspect ratio kind of thing that's talking about the dangers of trick-or-treating and what kids should do to stay safe. And then it cuts open to the wider aspect ratio. And I feel like that I love that. And I love like Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side. So I like those kinds of things where it's cutting in and out like that. And this movie does that, the whole movie. It opens up with a super old school looking TV, and it's so shiny and beautiful. It reminds me of like Daft Punk, something that looks new and maybe from an alternate universe with how fancy it looked, but very old at the same time. But they cut back and forth between that. So there's some random scenes, and I think it's usually when it cuts to a new scene, they cut back to this bluer looking screen. It's a small squarer with rounded edges aspect ratio, like it probably would have been way back in the day. and they, I guess it's like kind of reminding you like it's a show you're watching, but it's like pulling you in and out, pulling you in and out. And I thought that was so interesting because it's like the whole thing is like, do you want to believe it's real, or do you want to be more like Faye and believe there's something floating in the sky, and or do you want to be like Everett and just not believe the stories that some of the townspeople are telling you?
Right. I mean, it's definitely it's a reminder constantly that this is an episode of this paradox theater that you're watching, but it is also um, a reminder that what you're seeing in the story is kind of up to you. It's subjective, especially the end. What's really going on here?
Do you think that the director, if he ever makes another good, I think he's got a bright future ahead of him for sure.
Absolutely.
I almost, it's funny. It's like whenever like a new director comes around, I almost want like Hollywood to leave them alone and let them do their thing, because they take them and they conform them, they put them in the Marvel universe and say, "Hey, Edgar Wright, you're going to make Ant-Man." He's like, "Well, I was already making Ant-Man," and then there's this whole argument about it, and then they kick him out, and that's a whole big thing. But I feel like big budget studios can take them and conform them sometimes, and I want to see what this man could do on his own still. But my question is, do you think if they ever do you ever think they'll make it like an anthology series, like the Paradox Theater?
I would love to see that. I would love to see him make another film as part of an anthology series with this, with the same kind of setup. You know, of course, you have to refresh the idea, but I would love to see him even tackle another
Hmm.
mythological thing,
You know,
tackle Bigfoot, tackle something else. You know, I think that would be wonderful.
it would be cool, and I think what they would need for it to work, and there are a couple things I think that could do to make this really good is one, don't make it a full series like where it never ends. Make it a trilogy and have them be spiritually sequels to each other, not
Sure.
have it like this never-ending thing like the Cornetto trilogy with Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and you can tell they're all related, but the stories have nothing to do with each other. Um, I think that would be important, and they'd have to still keep that whimsical fantasy element of it, like something that is not just frightening, but it's also fascinating. And I think Bigfoot would be a perfect one. Something like the Loch Ness Monster would be another really good one, or something like that. I just would want them to really be able to keep the magic in there, not turn it to anything too gory, or like really keep the elements as minimal as possible. I want to feel like I could be put in that universe like I felt like in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say enough about this film. I think that everybody needs. I mean, obviously, if people are listening to this, they hopefully they've already seen it because we're giving you a lot of spoilers here. But if you haven't, you have to check this movie out. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I don't think I've seen a movie in recent memory. I think Trick or Treat, and that's from 2009, is one of them. I haven't seen a movie that has been kind of flown under the radar like this that I just want to cheerlead and just like let people know about, because I watched it and I wasn't sure what I was ready for, but when it started, I was on my couch holding my pillow. I was like on the edge of my seat the whole movie, and it's so rare that a movie that you're not is not a sequel or a franchise that you're familiar with does that. And it was just a delight. And what do you think? And I want to ask you this before I forget. Like, what do you think of the uh, the UFO itself, the extraterrestrials we get to see? I think we saw just enough, and it was beautiful, and it wasn't too clouded. I think it was clear, like because they very clearly show you a ship, two ships, and I just thought it was like the perfect amount.
You know, I absolutely agree with that. You know, again, like the Jaws thing with Bruce the shark not working, it made for a much better film. This is the same way. You don't see an alien. In fact, I don't even think the word alien or extraterrestrial is used in the film. They just say they and the people up there. I think that was really effective. And then you see the ship and you're like, you know, wow, I mean, these characters are just in awe of the ship they are seeing. But then you see that this ship is going to this absolutely ginormous mothership
Hmm.
and just seeing that was absolutely amazing, how small this big ship was in comparison to this huge mothership.
Yeah, and I like the ending. I like how it suggested they got taken by them and their radios left behind with all the recordings and interviews that they've done throughout the night. And it all takes place in one night, which I love. I think that's really interesting too, because it's just like this rush. It's like they're here. We got to try to see them now because it's the last time we're going to get to see them in our lifetime, probably. But like the old woman story, I thought was really good. I thought it was a nice lead in. I thought that they have like this interesting language thing that they talk about, and so you don't see any aliens, but they talk about some people who've been involved in situations, and they all have like this weird saying, and if you say it, they get into this like trance-like kind of thing, and I thought that was interesting. I thought they also gave us just enough of that because it was a nice segue into the ending and what happens to our two main characters. But man, it's such a fantasy ride and adventure for these two throughout the movie.
And you see with this language, I mean, Everett is looking at what's his name,
Yeah,
Gerald. He's looking at him in the car. It's almost like he's interested to play this language to see what happens, because the look he gives him right before is more like a curious thing, like, should I play this and just see what happens? And then of course he does play it and the language plays, and the next thing you know, Jerry, and I think her name was Bertzi,
yeah,
they're put in this trance.
yeah. And they're starting to look up. It's interesting, and I like what they say about like some of the people who have had contact with these things before in the past are saying like how they control everything about us. They're doing everything we do on a small scale, like getting our groceries to nations going to war. But we're left with like we don't really know what it was, or like what was it really? Some puppeteering things? Were they just visitors? Are making contact here? And um, I don't know. And it's funny because the ending's not very. It's not really a happy ending, but for some reason, because of the spirit of the movie, you feel kind of like I think they're safe.
Who knows what these extraterrestrials are doing with them? Are they just studying them? I hope that they're not like we would be, you know and I just say we as a society who would, I mean, I wouldn't, I mean, first of all, I'd be running, but I would not be cutting up an alien and studying it. But there are people on this planet, in particular our government, who would do that in the name of science. They would cut apart an alien and totally dissect it just to research it. I would hope that the aliens aren't doing the same to us, but considering what we would do to them, who knows?
Interesting that that whole Area 51 raid actually was getting a lot of hey, don't actually do that from the government, and mm, fascinating that they chose to respond at all.
I know. I really don't know if I believe that there would be anything at Area 51 at this point. Area 51 is such a known secret that I would totally think that they've moved everything to another location.
Area
Absolutely.
Area
Area
50,
51 is just kind of like a tourist thing at this point.
mm, Area 52, obviously.
Area 52. There you go.
Area something or other, and we'll never. Sometimes I wonder, um, with all the technology and everything we have now, I feel like it's really just a matter of time before there is something that happens and we have another Area 51 Roswell thing. And I don't know. I just feel like, I don't know. I'm not scared of the idea of that. But this movie definitely made me feel like a kid again and made me feel like wonder about the universe.
I know. I have to wonder if like the government finally just kind of like, okay, instead of trying to keep everything hush hush, we're going to leak a little bit out there, just enough to maybe satisfy the curiosity of some. But over time, the whole concept of aliens has become so ingrained in our culture and has become so lampooned and has become so ludicrous that government's like, the people have it handled themselves. Most of them don't believe it. The ones that do, they laugh about it. You have your small group of conspiracy theorists that they're not going to be concerned about unless they tread on property.
I don't know. That release of actual Pentagon footage though, with the Air Force saying what the heck is, and hearing them actually say that was super. I wasn't even scared. I'm like, that's super cool. That's so interesting. Like, I think they're starting to like, okay, let's just push out little by little because it's happening, and maybe they're saying like the technology is getting too good. Someone's going to capture something. Something's going to get on the internet one day, and but
this film totally captures the innocence of not being like this. Like I said, it was only just a little over a decade from Roswell, and even though it's in the same state, it's still not something that's fully believed. I mean, look, Everett doesn't believe it through most of the movie. He believes that Soviets are going to invade.
I love that when they see the burnt trees in the woods, which is very dark, but it's a great. I liked it because it didn't look too well lit, which I liked in a way, because I'm like, no, it would have taken away from the realism. But you see these burnt trees, and it's just like, oh, how creepy would that be to find in the middle of the woods? And like, why are the branches off the top? Like something was here. It's crazy.
Exactly. And is it the radiation that burned the trees?
I love how they don't tell us that.
I've never really understood, I guess maybe totally they always, not always, but when you talk about UFOs, there's always like talk, or mostly always talk about being in a burned area. And I don't, is that from the radiation? Is that what the idea is, that the radiation kind of burns the area? I don't know. I mean, I know that would be why they had these military guys digging underground.
Yeah. I just thought that was so interesting, like the whole story that Billy gives, and Billy had a great voice too for it.
He does. He's got a fantastic voice. His name is Bruce. I'm sorry, I don't know his last name. I know his first name is Bruce. But he's got a great voice, especially for radio. And that kind of voice really kind of sucks you into the radio drama of it, especially like we were talking about how the screen goes black and you're really kind of left to be in the dark and all you're hearing is his voice. It was really effective.
And they have like such a great, like I was saying earlier, they speak like it's that time. I love when they're like Billy, them talking on the phone, the radio DJ Everett speaking to some people in cars on the way, and hearing them all tell the story about that squirrel that threw through the wire last time.
That poor squirrel got a bad rap.
He did. He wasn't doing any of this electrical problems, and I love how everybody was like talking about that darn squirrel, and just like, what doesn't happen here? Wow, what a boring place this is for them to be. Everyone to be talking about that squirrel. And
exactly. I mean, this squirrel. Everybody knew the story about the squirrel. Even when it came down to the woman that would, she was the operator that Faye relieved. I can't remember her name. But she mentioned the squirrel. It was like everybody knows about this squirrel.
Everybody knows about the squirrel.
And the lady in the beginning knew about the squirrel. There was an owl who had all these small little critter bones all over the place in the attic.
Right. Yeah, that was funny. I loved hearing about all the
small town talk. When you I looked at the sign, the population was like 492. So when you have a population of 492, everybody knows everybody's business. And the highlights of the day are the squirrel that chewed through the electrical wire. It's fantastic.
It is. Because it opens up with everyone talking about that, and it kind of sets you up immediately. It's like, oh, okay, so this is a very secluded small town areas, and it's like we live. I feel like it's funny. We live in a New England area, and I feel like we sometimes get about how it's a little boring here, but we live between the two biggest cities ever. It's a very populated area right here in Connecticut. So it's it's funny because it's like that is a small town, and there's a lot more space in this country than we let on.
I was thinking back when I saw that sign, I was thinking back to when I was a kid, and the town I live in is a very small town. But when I was a kid, I think the population was like 13,000 or something like that, which is small population, for this area. But now, of course, it's not like that. But I just thought that was funny. I do have to bring up another observation, not made by me.
Sure.
My cousin brought this up, and I think it's a really cool observation. He was talking about, I wish I'd come up with this on my own, how Faye and Everett are the two characters who have these big aspirations of wanting to get out of their small town.
Mhm.
They want to go off into the world and do these amazing things. And they do realize their dreams just in a much bigger way, in a much different way than they thought. And I just thought that was pretty cool. It's like, you know what, you're right.
I like that a lot. That's a great thought, and I think we should definitely have him on season 2. By the way,
Oh, I'm sure he'd love it.
I don't know if we've said to anyone at all during this whole podcast, season 1 finale, right? But we'll type up some notes on it. But yeah, it definitely sounds like a good guess. And I love it because it kind of is like the whole biting off more than you can chew kind of storyline for your aspirations. And that's what brings you into this horror scene and kind of thing. I feel like that's a trope in horror movies, but I don't know. I just thought this one was so much more clever. I love how just the characters talk. I love how they talk about technology for now, like smartphones and things like that. And they actually talk about technologies that they think could be possible. But that's a great observation. It's like they wanted to get out in the world and they did, but so much more than they bargained.
Right. And when you're talking about the technology, they were very smart to incorporate things that do exist today, but make them just kind of outlandish enough to where it wasn't right on the nose. Like when she was talking about everybody's assigned a phone number at birth. And then that's how you're kind of like communicating. And that if somebody didn't answer, they were dead because they have that on them all the time, this phone on them all the time. And, so it was just outlandish enough to where it wasn't, like I said, right on the nose.
It was all true though, in a way. It's so funny.
But I mean, it's true. You can get a hold of just about anybody at any time. So,
and video FaceTime calls, all that junk. But yeah, I guess if I leave this podcast in this season with anything, it's definitely go check out this movie on Amazon Prime. And I don't know, you're just gonna feel it's nostalgic in a way, but different.
My we don't usually do this on this podcast, but my one request to anybody who listens through this is to please talk about this movie again on whatever social media you have. I looked a little on Twitter, and there seems to be a little hubbub around the time that it came out, but not so much sense. And I really think that that's a shame. I really think that this movie should be put back out there and brought back into the light. It's sad. I mean, it went through the film festival circuit, and then it landed with Amazon, and then came out on Amazon during a time where, it was probably the wrong time because it couldn't be pushed to theaters and it couldn't be accurately pushed to all sorts of drive-ins. Everything was kind of still closing down or closed down. So I think this got an unfair mark on it, and I think it needs to be propelled back into the light.
Definitely. I think we're going to get certainly a cult classic out of this movie regardless of what happens. But if you enjoy what you're hearing today and you enjoy the movie after you go and watch it, or if you have not already, definitely spread the word. Get the Vast Night out there so the world can know about it and enjoy this, I would say, instant classic. And I think that's the only way to describe it.
Okay, so now we're talking about how this is the season finale. We will be back for season 2. We're thinking maybe Mayish.
Something around like late spring, early summer, we're going to start collecting some thoughts on movies and things that we should be watching. So I think if anyone is listening to this all the way through, you should be laying some comments in the comment section and letting us know any interesting things that you think that we might like or we should be checking out for our season 2 roundup.
I do you want to hear my outlandish theory now before we close up?
I would love to.
Because, I just like connecting things that don't really connect. And I just based on the fact that this probably takes place in 58 to 59, somewhere in there, and probably 58, I'm guessing. And other movies have taken place around the same time. I'm thinking that this took place at the same time as Grease. Okay.
Possibly.
Yeah, because, well, Grease was 58 to 59.
That's right.
So now while everybody's celebrating Rydell High, I don't know. I just got really outlandish and I come up with all sorts of things that don't make sense. But at the end, Olivia Newton-John, John Travolta take off in the car. They're going up to see the aliens because they've been working for the aliens.
They never explain why the car flies, Rachel.
Right, exactly. Maybe they're going to the mothership as well.
It's possible. Do you think?
I mean, the woman did say that, the aliens do, well, she didn't say aliens, but they control people. So maybe they were controlling Sandy and Danny. And that's what made them lead to their choices of changing for the other. And then once that was done, you're the one that I want,
That's crazy. That might be true.
It's electrifying.
Well, how about this? Do you think that Faye and Everett got brought back in that scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind at the ending?
That's probably true. They are probably among them.
Because that movie takes place, what, in the 70s, I think? So it's a couple decades later. The ship looked pretty darn similar to me.
Yep. I think we're onto something. There's a big conspiracy theory here.
Something going on.
We're putting it all together.
I think Jaws might have something to do with it too. I'm not sure how, but I think it might have something to do with it. But yeah, really excited for season 2. Really excited for The Bastard Night. Really want everybody to go check that out. But yeah, Rachel, I guess this is wrapping up season 1 of Good Things to Watch, and I guess I just have to let you know how much of a pleasure it has been sitting in this movie theater couch with you, watching all these wonderful things this season and trying an experimental podcast with me and showing John Krasinski how this is done. You have any last words, any fun moments from the season?
All of it has been fun. I've really enjoyed taking our real life conversations that we've had, when we've gotten together and putting them out there. I mean, this is not people who don't know each other. You and I have been friends for a few years now, and this is just like our normal conversations. That's what this is. This is how we talk all the time. And I've really enjoyed doing this with you. So I'm looking forward to season 2.
You too, Rachel. It's a wonder we get any work done, huh?
I know, but we do. And we work very hard. Don't get us wrong. We work very hard. But this is the fun that has come out of us working together.
And that statement is entirely just for fun and false because we are very tired.
So, be sure to let us know in the comments what you'd like to see us talking about, to hear us talking about what we should be doing. And we look forward to seeing everybody in season 2.